McLean from TranceMusicMastery.com, and in this video I'm going to be continuing the walkthrough of the sketch project Mirrors that I created using various MyLoops samples from myloops.net. And track is primarily based around a kit 61 called Mirrors from the Trance Obsessions Volume 1 sample pack. Actually, that's it's basically a collection of MIDI kits with various the MIDI parts, and then you can either use presets or design your own sounds to play each part. And I'll be walking through the various clips that I'm using in this tutorial, but for this one I'm going to be focusing on these 4 bass tracks. So let me just solo each one in turn. Okay, and the actual clip itself, this deepbass.midi, that one, the full clip is right here, and I'll explain that later. But I'm using, for the intro part, I'm just using this first note, which is an F. The entire kit is based on F minor, this particular kit called Mirrors, kit 61. So, starting from the beginning here, let me just walk through the bass part for bass 1. And you'll see I've got the full clip here, but I'm only playing the first 2 bars, and then it just loops. And what I've done, let me change my grid to 1/4 notes. You can see that this note is going to play for 3/16 and then rest on the 4th beat. And that's a pretty common pattern that you hear in a lot of trance tracks that are out now, that have come out recently, I'd say in the last 6 months or so. And if I solo this bass with the kick, and then I'll just play it with the MIDI notes so you can see the timing involved here. In fact, let me just loop that. Let's do that one more time. Now, if you wanted a more choppy, sort of chunky sound, you lower the reverb send. So I'll just mute the reverb for now so you can hear what I mean. Okay, so you can vary that amount to get a different feel, a rhythmic feel. Let me go ahead and walk through the effects that are on this track. So first thing we're going to notice is this compressor. This compressor is used for side chaining, and I'm going to point out a few things about the side chain track. So in effect, I'm holding the note down for 3 beats, or playing the note for 3 beats. And the side chain is going to kick in at the beginning of each of these beats. Okay, so on the 1, the 2, the 3, and then the bass is not going to be heard on the 4th because the note stops here. Now, for the side chain compression, its source is the track SC, which is up here. SC stands for side chain. And if I double click on this guy, this is the same kick sample that I have here, but notice how the envelope is different. So with the kick that we hear on track 2, I've got the envelope tapering off here. With the side chain, I've got it pretty much full cut off here, right at the 3rd, 8th, or basically halfway through the beat. So if I go with an 8th note grid, these are now, in fact, let me go to 16ths. So this is the 1st 16th, the 2nd, the 3rd, and the 4th. So you'll notice that I'm only allowing the side chain to be heard or to be used as a trigger. The volume level is all the way up for the first 2/16 duration, and then it cuts off right here. So that affects the rhythm of the side chain. So let me demonstrate that with this Mirrors clip here on bass 1. And also let me mute the reverb. so that all we hear is the effect that the sidechain has on the bass 1 track. So what I'm going to do is set this all the way up, and then I'll bring it in, and then gradually bring it back to here so that you can hear what effect this is having on the rhythm. So you can also vary this duration as well, or this in part of the envelope as well, and we can experiment with that for a minute. Okay, so that gives you an idea of how this affects, the duration of this affects the sidechain, the sound of the sidechain compression gives on this bass in terms of rhythmic feel. Now, for the most part, I'm going to go through and just deal with the sound and what it's playing, the part it's playing, rather than going through the full arrangement. I'll be doing an overview of the arrangement and pointing out some key points later in the video series. In fact, in the last video of the series, I'll walk through the arrangement, how I have things laid out. But for this bass, I will say that in the beginning, it's all just playing the F note, and I'm really just trying to set up interesting rhythmic feel for the bass line and these other bass parts, and sort of to demonstrate that fairly common and popular bass pattern that's out right now. So the full bass progression occurs here. This is the clip from the kit, the Mirrors kit, right here. And as you can see, the notes are F, G sharp, A sharp, and C sharp. And that will sort of form the backbone of the chord progression that the pad is playing here in the track right here. But we'll look at that later in the video series. So let's go through the sound. So after the compressor, we've got the auto filter. Let me turn those off, and I'll talk about Silent 1 in a moment. But this is what it sounds like without the auto filter. So it's fairly bright. So to cut out some of that brightness, I added a low pass filter here. So I'll just enable that so you can hear what effect that's having. Still, there's some high frequencies to it, but it's been tamed quite a bit. And I've got another bass down here that's going to provide that more crispy top end to the bass line. Now, this other auto filter I'm using just to cut out some of the low so that this isn't a full-on, sub-bass type sound. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and play through this and enable and disable this auto filter. So that's basically just cutting out some of this low end here. And that'll make room for some of the other bass parts that'll be coming in a minute. Now, if we bring up Silent 1, I'm not modulating any parameters here, so these are all not assigned modulation slots. And this is let's see, we've got oscillator part A. So yeah, it's only 2 oscillators. And oscillator A1 is set octave 0. Note is 0, the fine is 0. It's a sawtooth waveform. 8 voices with some detuning to kind of fatten it up. That's panned or spread in the stereo spectrum. Their stereo setting is set to max, and that spreads it out in the stereo field. And then panned slightly to the left. So oscillator A1 is panned slightly to the left. We've got attack at 0, decay about midway, sustain all the way up, and release slightly off to avoid any popping noises at the end. And then we've got oscillator A2 also set for octave 0, note 0, fine tuning 0, sawtooth waveform, 8 voices detuned. Not spread as far apart as oscillator A1 in the stereo image, but fairly moderate amount. And slightly panned to the right just to help widen the bass sound. And then the cutoff frequency is slightly up here. It's a 24 dB per octave slope with some drive amount that's going to add some kind of like a saturation type to the filter. And resonance is up slightly. And when you program it like this, you end up with a sound like we heard a minute ago, and I'll go ahead and just disable this. All 3 of these, so now you just hear the raw sound coming from Silent 1. Alright, so that takes care of bass number 1. Let me go ahead and enable all of these. And while bass 1 is playing, we've also got bass 3 playing. So let me go ahead and do that one next. So we'll solo that one. So for this guy, what I did is I shifted the notes forward while bass 1 is playing for the first 3/16. Bass 3 is playing for the last 2/16 of the bar. Again, I'm playing F. So when I play both of these together, we end up hearing it like this. It sounds like this. And if we bring the kick in, okay, so you get the idea. It adds an interesting offset rhythmic effect where it's almost like there's some call and response going on between these bass parts. Okay, let me walk through bass 3 Silent 1 programming. This is a 2 oscillator. I'm only using part A. Oscillator A1 octave is -1. This is a saw wave. Voices, only 2 voices. Detune amount is almost halfway. Stereo halfway, pan in the center. Decay is about half, attack is at 0, sustain maximum, release slightly above 0. Notice also that A1's fine tuning is slightly negative, and oscillator A2's tuning is slightly positive, and that helps fatten up the sound by detuning the oscillators against one another. So not only are the voices within oscillator A1 detuned, but oscillator A1 is detuned against oscillator A2. And there's a triangle waveform on oscillator A2. Voices 1, volume slightly, actually volume's at 6.95. And that's because this is a higher octave than the other one. So let's listen to that. That's bass 3. I'll disable voices. So that's just oscillator A1. We're not hearing anything from A2 because voices is at 0. So you can hear how oscillator A2 changes the timbre of the sound. And I've got a bandpass filter, 12 dB slope with cutoff 6.2 kilohertz, rather high. But this EQ is pretty much taking care of the overall sound, cutting out a lot of that high end. And then that's really about it. There is a cutoff envelope modulation here just to help give it a little bit more interest. And that's really about it. So if we listen to that again. I'm going to turn off dynamic tube, EQ, auto filter, and that auto filter, and then we'll just listen to it without compression. So this is the raw bass sound coming from Silent 1. Alright, now with sidechain compression, it's got that almost a pulsing effect with the sidechain cutting in and out as the kick hits. Then we'll add some dynamic tube. This is going to basically distort the sound. Just add some dirt to it. And then for EQ8, let me enable that, and then I'll walk through. Let's see which ones are being used here. 3 is not being used. Basically just 1, 2, and 4. So 1's going to provide a boost here right around 85 Hertz. And then I'm pretty much cutting out a lot of the top end with these nodes 2 and 4. Although 2 is providing a little bit of a lift here. So let me disable these, and then I'll bring them back in one at a time. Okay. Next, I've got an auto filter, and this guy is basically set up as a low pass filter, so it's allowing the low frequencies to come through, and it's cutting out the highs. And you'll also notice that there's this little red dot here that indicates that there's some automation going on with the cutoff frequency. So let me go ahead and pop that open, and we'll see where that's happening. Yeah, that's happening going into the break. And I'll be walking through automation in the last video, so we're going to ignore that for now. And I'll explain that when I go through all of the automation in the track, which really helps create a more unified arrangement, because automation is crucial for transitioning in and out of the different sections of a track, and I'll be walking through that in the last video. So let's just listen to how this auto filter is affecting the bass sound here at the beginning of the track. So it cuts out some of that top end, the high end frequencies, and really gives it a deep, dark sound. Now finally I'll roll off the low end just a little bit, and that'll help keep room for the kick. Alright, and there is a little bit of LFO amount on this, and that helps. You know, it's going to be modulating the cutoff frequency basically, but it's very, very slow, it's like 0.12 cycles per second, so 0.12. So very, very minor amount here, and very slow, but it does help add some interest to the overall sound. So next, let's advance to bar number 9, which is the next 8-bar section, and we'll listen to. Before I go on to that, let me check one thing. Yeah, I do have some reverb being used for bass 3, so let's listen to that. I'll unsolo that, or unmute that. And that reverb is just there to help add some overall ambience to the part. Now if I play bass 1 and bass 3 together with the kick and the reverb enabled, then we can listen to this overall. Okay, so you get the idea. So next, let's check out bass number 2. Okay, so let's go through the bass 2 effects chain here. I'm going to start with the silent one. Let me disable all of these. And I'll bring up silent one and just walk through programming of this patch. Again, I'm not modulating anything here. I'm not using any modulations. No effects are set here. I do have part A. Am I using part B? No. So again, this is a 2 oscillator patch, just like bass 1 was. Oscillator A1 is pitched down 1 octave, 4 voices, sawtooth waveform, no detuning, stereo's at max, pan in the middle, and retrig is enabled. That causes the start of the note to always sound the same. Then we've got the amplitude envelope, attack 0, decay, slightly less than half, sustain slightly more than half, release slightly off 0, slightly above 0. Oscillator A2, very similar settings to oscillator A1, except that it's a triangle waveform and looks like everything else is the same. Okay, and next it's a low pass filter with 24 dB slope, slight drive amount, resonance at 0, and cutoff about 68 Hertz, but that's probably higher because it's affected by this filter control here in Silent 1. So never really sure exactly where that cutoff is set. And then slight resonance boost here, and then a little bit of key track here. It's at 0.48. And warm drive is enabled, which helps give it more of an analog sound. Mono legato is enabled, so it's set for mono. And portamento is set up so that, and the mode is set to S, which basically gives it more of a sliding sound as we change notes. So let me demonstrate that. There's a little bit of a slide effect going on as the pitch changes from one note to the next. So that's it for the sound. So let's hear that, the raw sound. Okay, next I'll enable the compressor. This is for side chaining. And I'll enable saturator. This is going to add some saturation. And then finally the EQ. I've got a little boost here, slope up, and then fairly prominent boost in, let's see, what's this, 5.16 kilohertz to help accentuate some of the high-end frequencies present in this sound. So let me disable these one at a time. Alright, so that is bass 2. Okay, let's go to bass 4. So again, here I'm moving the notes around, trying to not necessarily play them at the same time or same durations, although bass 3 and bass 4, these actually do play the same. But bass 3 is playing much lower frequencies than bass 4. Okay, so bass 3 sounds like this. And bass 4 sounds like this. Okay, so much more higher frequency, and when they're blended together, layered together with the reverb enabled, both combined sound like this. Alright, so next what we can do is just look at the effects chain. I'm going to disable all of these, and we'll hear Silent 1 by itself, and disable the effects here. Now this one does make use of the phaser, chorus, and some EQ. The EQ is really set to basically just provide a boost to some of the mid-range and the treble. and also that would be the lower mid-range here. And then basically reduce some of the bass frequencies, looks like right around 110 Hertz. Beyond that, it's a sawtooth waveform mixed for oscillator A1 with a triangle waveform and oscillator A2. Both oscillators are pitched down 1 octave and equal volume, no detuning. Stereos are both at max, panned in the middle, and general amplitude envelope with attack set to 0, decay slightly less than half, sustain slightly more than half, and slightly above 0 on the release. And so when you set that up with a low pass filter, 24 dB slope, add some drive, some warm drive, cut off about halfway on the knob here, and probably in the between 500, 168 Hertz range. There's some cutoff frequency modulation here. And when you do that, you end up with a sound that sounds like this. Okay, so now let's check part B. Yeah, there's nothing there, so this is just 2 oscillators. So now you take that sound from Silent 1 and you run it through the sidechain compressor, and it sounds like this. Then you add a saturator, crank up the drive, 36 dB. And then add an auto filter with just to cut off some of the low end. Really all that's going to do is just make a little bit of room for the kick. And then EQ8. So here I've cut out some of the mid-range, boosted some of the high frequencies, and then just another more roll off of the low frequencies just to get the overall sound as it is now. Also add some delay, so that's ping pong A. And some reverb. Okay, and when you do that with all 4 bass lines and you play the kick, and that's it for the bass tracks in this sketch project. I'll see you in the next video.